Welcome back, everybody. It's two guys in a stack of comics. I'm Mike. That's Reed. Oh,
Read.
Reed's over here, and the stack of comics is right behind me. Welcome back. We wanted to talk about if we were put in charge, Mike and Reed, head of DC Comics,
Yeah.
what would we do differently, and how would we create a better environment for the consumer and for the artists? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Um, as you can see, I have Marvel and DC Comics behind me, but I will be honest, even though I've been a DC fan for many, many years, um, and my favorite character, of course, is the Flash, DC character. Um, I don't have very many DC books on my pull list. I'm getting Jay Garrick and The Flash, and my decision to stop buying other DC books happened years ago. I would say probably about 10 years ago or more. The spin-offs, I love a good Batman tale. I love some of the old Green Lantern stories. Uh, I've liked Aquaman at times, Wonder Woman. I love a good Justice League story, but I have not bought any of those comics in many, many years. And to be honest, the reason is I don't know, I would get some comics, 10, 12 years ago, and I don't know what's going on anymore. I have no idea. I get a Batman comic, I have no idea what's going on. I'll wait till I would ask my LCS, like, where's a good jumping on point? I would jump in and I would be like, I still don't know what's going on. Um, and and they lost me. They really lost me. Although I stayed true to Flash, he stayed on my sub list all these years.
Hmm.
I can't. And Marvel, the same thing. We'll probably talk about Marvel in another video.
Yeah.
Marvel's the same thing. I love Spider Man. I love a good X Men tale. My favorite is the Thor. But I'll be honest, like I tried to buy a few here and there. I have no idea what's going on, and I don't like the way uh, when I have Flash on my pull list, my LCS would say, "Oh, we have a tie-in coming up, and you're going to want to buy this issue of Batman and that issue of Superman and this one of that, and then the spin-off series is going to be a separate standalone of 4 6 issue miniseries. But Flash is going to be in there, so you want to get it, Mike." I'm like, no. I tried a few of those spin-offs, and I was just like, Flash is in like 3 panels and that's it. And I'm like, I'll just stick to my Flash story. And if I miss a little bit here and there, so be it. I'm not going to delve into those areas where I just don't even know what's going on anymore. And I got to buy 4 titles I've never heard of before. And then I got to buy a Batman book where I have no idea what's going on. It's so confusing. I just threw in the towel. I buy these indies stories now. I love these little short indie runs, and I buy my Flash, and I'm a happy comic book guy. Just and a DC fan who's just decided to throw in the towel and go whatever, do whatever.
Yeah, I think, before we talk about like what we would do to fix it, I think, yeah, there's a lot of issues that have to show why DC fell behind. I still probably pick up about 12 DC titles a month. But that means basically Batman and like three others because Batman's like none of those titles.
I'm down to 2, man. I'm just getting, and the other one ends in 2 issues, and then I'm down to just one, and I'm a DC fan.
Now, I think for me, the modern issues that have happened, and we'll talk about what we would do, if we were put in the theoretical world, will we put in charge of DC? But I think, one of the things is there's way too many books coming out. I think that's the hard part. Is like I think I still buy 12. I'm still not reading, I think, even half of what DC releases, which I'd love to get into it, but like it just never really has a good entryway point. And because there's so many other titles with the characters I like, I'm not gonna. I don't have an unlimited budget, and so I try to keep it where I'm reading maybe 5 6 books a week. So if I'm picking up Batman and mainly Superman, like that's eating up the majority of what you have. I think the other part, like you mentioned, there's so many events, there's so many tie-ins, and there's so many times it just doesn't matter. And I have to say for DC Comics, I mean, I used to be one of the guy who read all the events. When something like, Crisis on Infinite Earths or Dark Crisis or whatever it was, man, I was all about it. I'm going to pick up this. I'm going to pick up the tie-ins. And they just lost me because when I started realizing the tie-ins have nothing to do with the main story, or the main story stinks because they're trying to sell all the tie-ins. I think the last event book that I really picked up was the Dark Knight's Metal, but it was a Batman evented series, so anything Batman I was going to pick up. But when they do these series now, they're tie-ins, like you said. Your characters that you love show up in a few pages. It really has nothing to do. It's not very related to the main story. They're charging you more money, and it's a break from the book that you're reading. I think the other thing too, you see so many good creators who are put on these Elseworlds offshoot titles. And while I appreciate those, I would much rather you just get the house in order of the main DC universe. As cool as it is for me to see like an A-list creative team on a subpar or a kind of sub Batman book, it's cool to read that, but at the same time, I'm like, man, you're using 10 creators that like are writing tangential Batman books when the Flash brand and the Aquaman brand and the Green Lantern Corps brand and the Justice League brand is really dying. And I get it, Batman's the reason to print money, and DC's always been a bit too Batman focused, but it is way over the top now. And I say that as a guy who buys basically everything Batman that I can. Um, so I think there's just way too many of those things, way too many books, way too many tie-ins, way too many events. And like you said, I think the hard part too is the entryway point for readers is not there anymore, in that it's not something like manga that has done well, where there's 100 volumes of a story and it doesn't always go back. But most of those seem to be that you can kind of start watching them and you can get integrated into the stories and then trace them down. What I'll say with DC is like you'll see times, and I will. Oh, this is an example I always use. One of the things that I really loved about DC Comics was they used to have these grand story arcs, and so one of my favorite runs ever is Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run. It took
Yes.
about 10 years. It was fantastic. It took Hal Jordan from a really awful place where he had started because they had done some stupid things in the '90s and made him Parallax and a villain, and Johns through Green Lantern Rebirth rebuilt the character, put him in a series, and it ended up Green Lantern becoming one of the biggest and best-selling titles they had. With
It was
multiple,
epic.
yeah, it had multiple books. The events were focused on around Green Lantern, but so much of the Green Lantern story was about Hal and Hal rebuilding his life, and really about him getting back with Carol Ferris. And so I remember around the time the New 52 happened, Jeff Johns, I think, wrote the first 20 issues of the New 52, had a beautiful ending to it. Really seemed like everything was redeemed. Hal was with Carol. All this stuff is good. You're like, man, this is a great place. He leaves. And then in issue 21 comes out with a new writer. And I think literally within 6 pages, he ends the Hal Jordan Carol Ferris relationship, sends Hal back to space. And Hal spent the next couple of years with all these things and all this stuff that he rebuilt basically being erased. And I get it, creative teams do different things, but like as a reader, if you read that, it's like, man, what the heck happened here? That
It was
this
a sad day. It was.
and it's really tough, I think, when you have that. So for me, I think while I believe artists should be able to tell the story they want, you also have to do a better job. If you're not going to have everything be a new jumping on point for readers, then you have to do a good job of honoring what came before. But you can't have convoluted backstories and we're just going to reset stuff whenever we feel like it, because that's
Yeah.
kind of what they seem to do. Um, so
So
that's
the
kind of the
first thing,
negative stuff. Mike, what would you start with if I put me and you were put as editor in charge? It will never happen, but theoretical world where this happens, what's the first thing you would do if I put you in charge of DC Comics?
I think the talent pool has to shrink. Like we need to find true blue talent who is invested in the characters, a handful of people that really love the characters, pay them more money,
Hmm.
and put them on books that they're and pair them with the books that they love the most. That's where you're going to create the most creative juice and get really good solid stories. So a smaller group of talent
Hmm.
and a smaller number of titles, and just give me a few titles to get. And then I would start getting into it. Like, I don't know how many Superman books there are. But
Typically 2 or 3 at the same time. Yeah.
you know, give me a good Superman story. Give me a good Green Lantern story again. Give me you know, a couple of good Batman titles. I've been trying to get into You've been trying to get me into Batman
Yeah. Yeah.
for like a couple years. Like,
Uphill
try
battle.
this book out, try that book out. I'll tell you what, man. I got those facsimiles of year one.
Yep.
Uh, I'm enjoying reading those. Those were so well done. And so, but yeah, I would start with the talent.
Yeah, I think the big thing is I would if we put me in charge, right? If we were us in charge, first thing I do is I'd go and see what's our budget, how much do we spend a year, and then I would see how many books we're releasing, and then I would let everybody who's already on a book right now know, hey, you got 6 months, wrap up your stuff, wrap up your storylines. We're not going to give your fans that are having a book, but you got 6 months, finish your stuff.
Yeah.
And then I would reduce my talent pool down to I would basically have about maybe a writer's room of about 10 people, 10 writers, and maybe 20 artists because art, different process, got cover art, that kind of stuff. And then I would basically put maybe 12 to 15 books out a month. And I would have those 12 writers, they are in lockstep. They have meetings with each other all the time, like a company. I think one of the things that's weird with DC Comics is they're a company, but not. Like you and I both work in the corporate world. You would
Yeah.
never have a gigantic project where you have 8 different departments all trying to do incredibly different things and they don't check in with the
Yeah.
main office and then they launch stuff. And it's like, wait a second. Like in this book, DC does all the time. Like in one book, Batman's got his hand chopped off and he's fighting a multiversal villain that is like his subconscious in a robot. And then
Yeah.
the other book, Batman has lost all of his memories and is in the underworld. And I get that those two stories can be different because they're two different books, but it's like, guys, you can't have that he literally has a hand missing in one book and in the other is not reflected. And they're
There's
not
no
even
continuity.
well, they're not even doing the stuff that they used to do, like lazily in the 90s, where there was like a little note, like this story takes place before the events of Batman 27 or whatever. They,
Yeah.
they, they don't even take the time to do that anymore. And so the big thing is, I think if you brought it down to maybe 3 or 4 books a week, maybe 15, 16 titles total being released, I would have every title being set in the main DC universe. For now, we're putting a pause on Elseworlds. We'll get the other multiversal stories in line when we get our main universe in line. But I would have
Yeah.
that. I think you could then, if you reduced, if you didn't have all these dumb offshoot books and a million different people who don't produce sales results, get some people in, have a very small writer's room. Because I think if you could have DC, even if it wasn't 15 or 16, let's say they reduced it to like 8 books. But if you had 8 solid, great books that every month it was like, man, this is a hit, I
I
think
would
that
buy
would work
them.
significantly better.
I would buy
Like
them.
you said, if they made DC manageable, and I think 16 books probably the perfect thing. Because if I could walk in every week with a $20 bill and I can pick up every DC book that week, and I can read the entire DC universe for $20 a week. Because the thing is, and I'm sure there's economics behind it and stuff like that, why they just keep printing so much. But the thing is, there's so many DC comic books that get canceled, and you can tell they're going to get canceled. And they're not going to sell before they even release. And I think I've mentioned this in 2 or 3 videos. There's like a Fire and Ice series that came out with no name creatives on it. And nothing against them. I'm sure they're doing the best work they can. But like you can look at that in DC and be like, guys, why? Why did you? This was never going to get you sales. This was never going to produce results. This was never going to lead to a hit for you. And you'll see just and we all know them. I'm not going to call people out by name, but there's writers that they get put on a book and you're like, dude, really? That's going to go like 8 issues. This person's like last 6 series have been canceled in like 6 issues. And the whole thing is, I think you have to at a certain point. It's better to do nothing than to do something poorly. Because like I think we've seen this with comic book movies. Marvel, in all honesty, probably would have been better with the MCU if after the Endgame thing, taking a 3 year break instead of what they've done.
And
I
take a
think
step back and regroup. And you know, the comic book industry was born in these little rooms, you know, on Lexington Avenue in New York City, you know, and there was just like the bullpen. And it was that way for DC too. And maybe their offices were a little bigger back in the day, but that environment was the what was the incubator for all the greatness that came out. It was a core team, handful of people, and and it worked. And right now, where it's gotten all over the place, it kind of needs to, in my mind, I would come back to that little bullpen kind of mindset and just kind of get, everybody in a room together. And they used to do that. I mean,
Well, no, and the
I
thing
remember,
is, I think you have to get writers who just work for your company too, and that's where you have to increase wages. One
yeah,
thing that hurts now, I think, is there's no loyalty, it seems like, from a lot of writers. Jeff Johns is the last writer that I remember was like, that's a DC guy. That's a
yeah,
DC guy who cares about the DC universe. Everybody else kind of seems like, well, I might write for Marvel this month and then this month, this month. And that's fine. They got to make money. So I'm not blaming the creatives on that. But I think if
mhm,
you're DC, again, one of the things is you keep barreling along to lower and lower sales. So at a certain point, you've got to reduce your line. And then the thing is, if you could get like Jeremy Adams, maybe Tom, I'm not a huge fan of Tom King, but he does get some sells stuff that sells. Get 5, 6, 7 writers, 5, 6, 7 artists. Sit them down, and those are DC guys. That's it. You guys are this. Have brand name kind of like loyalty. And it's like you would never have, you and I are sports fans, you would never have the coach of the Bears, who is also an assistant coach for the Rams, who is also an assistant coach for the Saints, and a kicker who kicks for the Rams and the Giants, like, because that's not going to produce loyalty. And they're serving
right.
different ones. And I know all the writers are going to say they do the best thing they can, and I'm sure they do. But the thing is, if you build that loyalty of like, no, you're a DC guy. And so the overall health of DC as a comic book industry is your responsibility. Right. And this is so weird to me, like when I see this, because it's like at work, me and you get this in an office, you would never have where it's like, well, you're going to work for this department and that department, but we really want you to be like really invested in this department. And it's like, no, of course they're going to serve multiple masters and try to do different things because they can't. They're trying to serve everybody. So I think the thing is,
Yeah, and also
they've got to do this.
if you give the creators a stake, you
Yeah.
know,
No, and
and
that's where the money part would, I think, have to come in. Is,
yeah,
I
it
look
would
at
make
the
them.
averages of the books and go, hey, on average, Flash sells 50,000 copies a month. I don't know if it's that high. I'm just picking a number. And I'd say, look, you're the new Flash writer. Everything after 50,000 copies, you get 50% of. So here's and I would look at the book and go, hey, we spent X amount of money on it. This is our break even line. Once we hit our break even line, you and I start splitting the 50% profit. And then I think that would inspire these creators to write books that more people want to read. Because the
Yeah,
thing that you have now, you have some of these creatives who will make really dumb decisions because it was popular with 5 people on Twitter. And it's like, but they know it's going to kill the sales. But because they don't have a stake in the sales, it's kind of like, I don't care. If it sells 55,000 copies, cool. If it
I
sells,
still get my check.
I get my check. And
I'm
I'm
out of
sure
here.
they want the books to keep going. I'm sure they all hope it'll take off and they get their name out of there.
And you know what
If you
what
gave
they're
them that
doing?
stake, it would do it.
Yeah, all the while where they're collecting their DC check, they're thinking about, eventually I'm going to get into the indies and do what I really want to do.
Yeah.
And that's so sad. It's like, let's
Well,
get you to get those creative juices going for DC.
Well, the thing is, yeah, I think the other part that I would look at is once you then develop that, hey, you're a DC guy. Hey, what's your indie book pitch? Okay, cool. We can create a sub thing of that and have that published by us or something, right? I think
Sure.
another thing, you look at DC in the 90s or early 2000s ish era, they had that whole Vertigo line. Those were more kind of experimental stories and things like that. They gave those guys creative freedom. And I think that's the other huge part too, is like there's absolute legends who just don't do a lot of comic work anymore. And it kind of feels like they were just tired of dealing with the bureaucracy stuff and all that. I would try to invite those people out. And the only way you're going to get them back is better salaries. But the thing is, and that you can see this with lately Ultimate Spider-Man, when you put a name on a book like Jonathan Hickman and you get a good artist and you get enough hype behind it and it's a character people want to see, you can still create demand for comic books. You can still create something that people care about. And right now, I mean, like you just see it in the quality of the work that it's like it's work for hire work, and you can tell. It kind of
Yeah.
like comic books right now. There's a few great ones like Jeremy Adams, who I think does really good stuff on every title he's on. But there's a lot of other ones where it's like, you kind of mailed it in this month, didn't you? Like this is
Yeah.
not a passion project for you. You wanted the paycheck.
Uh,
I'm not blaming anybody for wanting the paycheck.
right.
You've got to replicate that indie part of it in that. what indies do so well is it's like, man, it's your baby, it's your brainchild, and it will live or die based on how well you deliver for an actual audience.
Yeah,
Not what does social media think, not like, ooh, people on Twitter were saying, because so many of these modern comic book writers are writing for an audience that doesn't exist. You're writing for people who will like your posts online who don't even know where their local comic book shop is. And
that's
that
really
and that
sad.
and that's the thing is it's like if you go in and you write a story with an actual audience, like write it for people who are actually going to put their money where their mouth is. And if you do that, then you're going to have success. And I think that's the biggest thing DC's got to do, reduce the line down, get less writers, less artists, get consolidate. And that's the other thing too is if you have those folks in there, they'll start to work together. You might see like, okay, this artist was working on this book. It's not working out as well, but we could move him to this one. Instead, it kind of just feels like random at this point. Like, this person can draw. Put
Yeah.
him on whatever book we need. And I think that would
So
really work. And then,
so
yeah,
if we were going to reduce it down, what are the titles that you would
you
keep?
have to have Batman. You have to have Detective Comics. You have to have Superman. You have to have Action Comics. You're not DC Comics if you don't have those titles. And then I'd say Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman, Green Lantern, probably Harley Quinn at this point. I would probably have about Green Arrow. So I'd probably go about
Justice League?
books. And then yeah, like 14 books. You got to have a Justice League book. You got to have a Teen Titans book. And I would have a JSA book that's like set in the 40s to give us a different feel. And then I would probably just have an overall Gotham book, like Gotham Knights or something like that. And that's where you can get your Nightwing, your Batgirl, your Tim Drake, Red Hood kind of things. Maybe make Dick Grayson the main character of that one, but
Teen
have
Titans.
a lot of yeah. Teen Titans would have Dick Grayson. That's the other thing too is like I would use a book like Justice League to hey some of these characters you haven't seen in years, Red Tornado, Animal Man, Swamp Thing, characters, Dead Man, characters like that. Throw them in the Justice League. One of the cool
Sure.
things that got me into DC Comics was when I was a kid. They did that Justice League Unlimited series on TV, and I think I was like 12 or 13 at the time, and I used to watch it with my little brother a lot. But the cool thing with it was you'd see some of these obscure characters, and they'd get a cool episode.
Yeah,
I know The Question had a couple episodes on there where they paired him up with Huntress. I'd never seen The Question before.
I know. That was
All
pretty
those cool
cool.
episodes, and I was like, man, I gotta go find this character. And I went into comic shops and I found old issues of The Question and graphic novel collections that he had, and it was cool to read those. And so I think the thing is that's how you can grow a brand is like you've got to give them some space to actually have stories. So I would use my team up books to do stuff like that.
Sure.
And then the other part that I would get rid of events, no events, no events for 5 years. I would get my new writers room. And if you want to do an event, here's the thing I would do. All of our writers, since they all work together, they're all in like a Zoom room weekly meeting about what are you doing in your book? What are you doing in mine? Because I don't want to have Batman's dead in your book, but alive in my book. Whatever. I don't want to have Red Tornado got corrupted and he's evil in this book, but in this one, he's a hero. We're all working together. And then if we're going to do an event, hey, guys, in your book, start putting this subplot thread in there about
Yeah.
something changing, some sort of thing happening. And then everybody who's reading the titles can kind of see, like, what is this thing going on in the background? And then you do an event. As opposed to how they do it now, where it's like, there's a darkness that appeared and it took over everyone. Like,
But
okay,
it's going to be a spin-off series.
yeah, but now we're gonna stop the main series and do an overpriced, double-sized event issues, and then your books will all have tie-ins with different worse writers and artists for the next 3 months. It's like, no, you can't do that anymore. Stop making filler issues. Stop making stupid events. If you're gonna do an event, let it be an event. And then I
And
think
make
the other
it
thing is
make
like the
it
Elseworld
permanent.
stuff. Yeah, and that's the other thing that if I was in charge of DC, if you're gonna do a permanent change, it better dang will be permanent. If you're going
I
to
know.
kill someone, they need to be dead for like 20 years. That I think it would stop so many stupid decisions where it's like, this month let's kill off Green Arrow. 2 months later let's bring him back. Like, no, if you're gonna go through the trouble and you're gonna kill a character, it better dang well have stakes. It better matter, and you better have the intent be that that character's gone for good.
Yeah.
Not, oh well, hey, 5 years from now, return of like no. And that's where old comics used to be so cool is like when Captain Marvel died in that 80s Avengers story that he's in, that mattered and it still matters. And it
Yeah.
resonates. And it's a reason that story is still popular. Is it's like, dang, man, like that was it. Um, every month now it's like, let's kill a character. Let's do an event. Oh, it's another crisis. It's a crisis of the crisis of the crises for this month. We have our multiple infinite dark crisis of the crisis this month. And it's like, stop.
Infinitely Dark Crisis.
Like, just stop. Like, no, it doesn't work anymore.
Infinitely Dark Crisis Part 2.
Well, I think that's the thing is you can
Part
read so
3.
many of these events, and I'm sure there's editors, I'm sure there's people sitting there, but I don't know what they're doing. And in all honesty, they make decisions that you're like, you know, you're gonna undo this in like 6 months. Like,
Yeah.
I thought the book was really well drawn, but a couple months back or a couple years back, there was Heroes in Crisis, which was a Tom King book.
Mm,
In that book, he had like a bunch of superheroes got killed, and Wally West ended up being the person who had killed them. You
that
could
was
read,
so wrong.
you could read the
I'm
book.
still mad at Tom King for doing that.
Oh, like it's in it, and it was what was so weird is the art in that book. I think Clayman did the art, amazing art, but like the story, you're like, what are you doing?
I couldn't believe it. As I was turning the pages, I was like, what?
Well, I'm like, as
What?
soon as that's done, okay, is DC really going to turn Wally West, who's maybe one of the 10 most popular characters, into a
Into a
murderer,
murderer.
into a villain? No.
Yeah.
So then this is just going to become one of those stupid things that, like, oh, well, Wally had a period where he did something dumb, or you're going to have to, it was a doppelganger, or heck, it's the Flash. So at some point,
Alternate universe.
alternate
Version.
universe, or heck, in the Flash, at some point it's going to be it was Yobard Thawne in
Yeah.
eyes,
Yeah.
and he was really Wally. We're like,
Right.
no, that's coming, and that's the
Yeah.
whole thing. Is like, if you're gonna do these event things, you have to have them matter. And like, I don't know what the editors are doing. Like, I can't, as soon as someone would come to me with a, here's the Wally West becomes a murderer story. Thank you. That's the first draft. Take that back. We're not going to kill Wally. Have a good day. Like, no, you're, and the whole thing
Julie
is,
Schwartz is Brian going like, what are you doing, guys?
well, and that's the whole thing is like, look, as soon as if someone did come with an idea, I want Wally to be a murderer. Okay, then Wally better become the big bad of the DC universe. If you're going to take that step, then this is the point of no return for Wally, and Wally is going to be our main huge DC level villain. The
Lex
remainder
Luthor,
of this.
the new Lex Luthor.
Yeah, he needs to be the new like Reverse Flash, Eobard Thawne, whatever. If you're
Yeah.
going to take that step, it dang well better have consequences. It not be like, oh, Wally killed these people, but Wally's sorry. Wally's going to go to prison for 2 months. Oh, Wally broke out. Like, no, because it just comes across as stupid, lame, has no stakes. And I think that's the thing of why DC's driven so many people away is so many of these stories. It's like, guys, you knew you weren't going to stick with this.
I know, like I said, huge DC fan. I'm really only, I got 2 technically on my pull list,
Yeah, with
right?
Jay and Frost. So yeah, I think
That's it.
that's the thing.
I'm
Reduce the
done.
books.
I'm done.
Yeah, you put us in charge, reduce the books, find out what the budget is, hire whatever great artists and writers we can get with that budget, make it so that it's manageable, that a fan with $20 in his pocket could go in and buy the entire DC universe for that week. And then I would say no events for a very long time.
I
But
think it'd be cool, like to shrink it down a little bit.
yeah,
Makes it more personal.
no, I'm like suspend
And
the Elseworld stuff for a bit, have where Elseworlds is. Hey, once we get the main line, then we can
that's
have
where
stuff.
greatness came from.
Yeah.
Those little bullpens on Lexington Avenue in New York City. There's little
Well,
rooms.
I think that's the other thing is if you only had 15, 16 books, you could have maybe one. I'm sure you'd have to have multiple editors, but you could have one guy who sits down and looks at all those books. If you had 4 books coming out a week, if your job is to be like the editor in chief of DC Comics and you don't have time to look at 4 comics a week, you're not doing your job. So that's the whole
Right.
thing is like, hey, before we put any of these out, we're going to review all of it and then go forward. And then I think lastly, I think, and we'll wrap up real quick here, but I think the other part is every book would at least get 20 something issues, same writer, same artist. And then we'd kind of
Yes.
treat it like a TV show model of like, hey, after 20 issues, sales are a little low. We're going to cancel you. You get 3 or 4 issues to wrap up your stuff, and we'll get a book to replace you.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we look for overall. Let us know what you think below. What would you do to save DC Comics? If you were the editor in chief for a day, how would you do it? As always, we won't pretend to be experts on this thing. I'm sure there's economics and things behind it that would have to get manipulated around, but we always love seeing your thoughts. So let us know what you think, and we will see you in our next video.
Thanks.